All right, let's try this again. Welcome to the Small Scale Life Podcast. This is Talking Taboo, Episode 2, and I'm your host, Tom. Talking Taboo is all about the new Tom Hardy show on FX. And this particular episode of the podcast is all about Episode 2 of the show. I am releasing this right before Episode 3 here in the US. I know in England they've already released Episode 3, and you can see it out there on YouTube, but I haven't watched it yet. So I really wanted to focus on Episode 2, almost as a recap of the show, talk about some of the new characters, and some of the questions and mysteries that keep popping up here in the show. For new listeners and followers, thank you for joining us tonight. Small Scale Life is a blog and weekly podcast dedicated to developing a sustainable life through gardening, healthy living, frugal living, and having adventures along the way. And I chalk this all up into the adventures category. Plus, I'm learning a new skill with this live streaming thing, and I still have a ways to go. Obviously, this is trial number 2, so we're just learning and having some fun. And I really like the show, so let's talk a little bit about Episode 2. What'd you think of Episode 2? A couple of questions were answered, and we have some new ones as well, and we'll talk about those at the end of the show. We've got some new characters that were introduced in this episode. Probably the most interesting was Atticus. He seems to be what I think of as a 19th century blogger. He's got his pen or his pencil and his book, and he's writing all kinds of little details because he's going to write a book someday. But Atticus was a friend and sailed with Horace Delaney, and he knows James. When James first meets him, he's covered with blood and he's got a butcher's knife. He's got tattoos. He just looks like he is a person that knows the underworld in London pretty well. So we'll see how dangerous Atticus is. We also have Prince Regent George IV. This seems to be a degenerate royal who lives in total opulence in the palace. And he's just kind of a grotesque individual. Just his skin looks pretty rotten, and he's just pretty fat. He is obviously narcissistic. He just is totally consumed with his dream that he was all alone without any companions or advisors, and he sees himself as a whale with all of these Americans who are just little shrimps shooting bows and arrows at him. So it is a kind of a fitting metaphor for who he is. And his character is actually based on a royal that lived in that time who was pretty degenerate and pretty disgusting. So it'll be interesting to see what he will do. He is obviously no fan of the Americans, and he's no fan of the East India Company. He wants to screw them. So we'll see what happens there. We also meet a girl from the brothel who seems to be Helga's daughter. Her name is Winter, and she's looking out for James Delaney as well. We have another character, Mr. Silvertooth. He is an assassin, and we will see him at the end of the show. We have Dr. Dumberton, who is a doctor, and I say a tie-dye master, but he's actually experimenting with colors and dyeing cloth and material for flags. At least that's what he says. And he is an American spy. And finally, we have the new character, Lorna Delaney, who is also known as Lorna Bow. She's an actress, and she appears from nowhere and claims to be Horace Delaney's wife. That throws a whole wrench into James Delaney's plans. So those are the characters that were introduced in this episode. We also have the House of Delaney, James, Horace, his sister, brother-in-law, and the others there. We also have the House of the East India Company, Sir Strange, and all of the people on the company payroll. So yeah, it's getting to be quite complicated. There's quite a few players in the show. But it'll be interesting. So the story so far, if you've been following it, we'll kind of do a recap here just to get us all on the same page. So at the start of the episode, we were back at the East India Company, and we find that Sir Strange and his minions have not successfully killed James, and Sir Stuart Strange is very upset by that. Obviously they want James out of the way so they can do what they want to do over in the Americas. Meanwhile, James returns to the hill where he first landed when he came back to London, back to the Britain, and he goes up to the hill and he digs down and recovers his pouch. And that was one of the questions that I had from episode 1. What was it? Was it a talisman? Was it some kind of a token? Was it something that was keeping him alive? No, it was something that's needed. It's a pouch full of diamonds, and he is going to use those diamonds to carry out his plan. So what does he do? He goes and buys a ship in prize court in an auction. British captains, it was customary. It was what was done. British captains, naval captains would go out and they would take prizes. They would take enemy ships. They would take merchant ships, and the crew, the cargo, the ships, anything on board, and bring them back into British port, and the items would be sold off at auction. So James has bought a Spanish ship. Obviously, a captain brought it in to prize court, and he buys it for £800. And he also founds the Delaney Nootka Trading Company and says that he is going to begin trade with Nootka Sound. So this greatly angers Sir Stuart Strange. There was a East India Company records manager was there, relays the information, and Sir Stuart Strange firmly believes that the Americans are funding Delaney simply to get under the skin of the royal family. So should be interesting to see how that Delaney uses that. After the auction, that's when Delaney finds his old friend Atticus. Atticus stole his horse, left his calling card, his name, on a piece of paper. And obviously Atticus is a rogue and a killer. And Delaney ends up hiring him for his eyes and ears on the streets of London. You can't take on the royal family and also the East India Company. You have the biggest superpower in the world and the biggest global corporation with private armies and navies in the world without having eyes and ears on the street and eyes and ears in the back of your head. So Atticus will provide some sort of protection and gather new information gathering for him on the street, and he's got ties in with the underworld that James can use. The next scene is where we meet the Prince Regent George IV, and he's more concerned about the color of the ships on the map. The Americans are trying to blockade some of the British Navy, and he's more concerned about the color of the ships than the fact that than any military strategy, any naval strategy, and the fact that the Irish might be supplying the Americans with drinking water, hardtack, which is food, and other supplies. So he's just not concerned with any of that. He's more concerned about his vision of being a whale. So it'll be interesting to see how the Prince Regent comes into play as the story unfolds. We flip back to Delaney, who is near the docks, and he's visited by this girl named Winter. And she talks about an assassin that's trying to kill Delaney with the silver tooth. And she leads him to Mr. Silvertooth's ship. The ship is out in the harbor, and Delaney rows his skiff out there and swims and boards the ship. After investigating and really finding no one on board, he does take some items, and sets fire to the ship and burns it completely. And when he swims back to the rowboat, he finds that Winter is gone. So was Winter an aberration? Was this a vision? I think she's real, but we'll find out. Delaney returns back to his residence where he starts to pull apart his father's study, looking for the treaty, and he thinks it's on animal skin, deer skin, and he does not find it in the study. So we don't know where that treaty is, and that'll be a pretty big part of his plan, is to have that treaty in hand and begin negotiations. After that, next day, Delaney visits his ship, and he discovers that the ship was used in the slave trade. He finds beads, he finds the irons. He kind of has some flashbacks to his time on the slave ship, and he performs some kind of an exorcism, essentially, to rid the ship of demons and put the spirits to rest. Of course, I'm sure all the ladies liked it. He was completely naked, but he does rid the ship of any spirits, and that is another mystery for this episode. The fan group on Facebook had found a couple of ghostly images, and one of it's when he's in the hold of the ship, and there's a ghostly image behind him. Another one is in the study with all the books, and there's a ghostly image there. But this was the first sighting of a ghostly image in the hold of the ship. Delaney then goes and visits the doctor, who's very interested in creating God's colors. Delaney provides some information, some key words to the doctor, and lets him know that Delaney knows that the doctor is an American spy. And this is a page right out of the Patrick O'Brien books. Patrick O'Brien wrote Master and Commander series, where the doctor, the naval surgeon on the ship, was an actual spy, was a British spy. So this is a similar thing, where the doctor is an American spy. So nothing too original there, but it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, especially with how this episode ends. The spy is curious about Delaney because Delaney is talking so much about things that he shouldn't know, but a person that provides that much information, provides those code words, it could be dangerous for a spy in a time of war. So he pulls a gun, kicks Delaney out, and I'm sure is collecting more information on who this mysterious James Delaney is. James asked to be connected directly to the President of the United States to begin negotiations about Nootka Sound. So this is going to get interesting. After all this business is concluded, we go to Thoit's office, the family lawyer's office, for the reading of the will. And as Delaney enters with his strong box, there's a number of creditors there who are very rowdy and demanding payment. Horace did not pay off his creditors, and they are pretty upset about it. Delaney has spent his nights studying the books and the affairs of his father's business. He provides the exact payment, dumps out the strongbox, tells them all to line up in an orderly fashion, and they'll be paid according to what they're owed. And just like the old man near the water in episode 1, who was so angry at Delaney, when he shows up with the money, with the goods, they all get in line and behave rather quickly. So we see this pattern again. But at this point, this is when a woman approaches from the crowd, and she lays claim to the Delaney estate. She is Lorna Delaney, who supposedly married Horace 2 years prior in Ireland, and she has a document to that effect. So she is going to put in a claim on the property, and Thoit takes the documentation. He does some background checks over the next day or so, and then relays the information that indeed this document is correct, that she appears to be the wife of Horace Delaney and has claim to the property. And this will set in a chain of events where if James Delaney is killed, the wife will take it all, and they can work with the wife. They feel that they can work with the wife. So the word goes out that he needs to be killed. James attends a concert, which was pretty much the fashion of that age. Everyone respectable, military officers, naval officers, the high society would go to these concerts at mansions. They'd bring in string quartets and play. And it was quite the party. But James attends one of these concerts, and he wants to get close to Zilpha, and he wants to have a conversation with her. They have that conversation out on the steps. Zilpha asks him different questions. Again, James shows his feelings for her, and it is a weakness. I think it'll be used as a weakness as their secrets are discovered later on in the next 6 episodes of the series. So after leaving the concert alone, James is attacked by an assassin. He walks through the streets of London, heading home, I'm assuming, and the assassin with the silver tooth attacks. James does kill the assassin with his knife, but he also takes a bite out of the assassin's neck, which was pretty grisly. It reminds me of Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead with the hunters. But James kills the assassin, but he also takes a knife in the stomach, and he blacks out on the street. So we'll find out what happens in the next episode, who puts him back together again. This also ties in with his conversation with Zilpha that he just had, where she asked him if he ate flesh when he was in Africa, and he really didn't answer that question. At least not in public. He would have preferred her to come with him, and he would tell her everything that happened, but she didn't bite on that, so to speak, no pun intended. So we'll see what happens. I'm sure we have 6 more episodes that he doesn't die in the streets. So some of the mysteries that were solved in this episode, we found out what the buried satchel was. It contained diamonds, a lot of them. James used the diamonds to buy the ship. He used it to start his trading company, and he also gave Zilpha a large diamond as well. Paid off the creditors and probably the old man that's taking care of his son or brother. We don't know which yet. And then the conversation at the concert confirms that James and Zilpha did have an affair before he left to Africa. So we'll see where that takes us. We have a bunch of new mysteries. It seems to be stacking up. New mysteries, new questions. Number 1, who's Lorna Delaney? What claim will she make? How will they deal with her? Number 2, did James eat flesh in Africa? Seems like a pretty good question to me. Seems like we are building a case that he might have. I mean, who does that really? He had stabbed the assassin already. Why bite his neck out? It just doesn't make sense. Unless he's a vampire, who knows? Number 3, what happened to Winter? She was in the rowboat. She's out of the rowboat. Did she walk on water? Was it an aberration? Is it all in his head? He does have these flashbacks. So we'll find out. Number 4, where is the original treaty for Nootka Sound? Where did it go? Why is it missing? Who has it? Number 5, what does the Prince Regent have in store for the East India Company? Obviously, he wants to break the company, but they're around for a while longer and outlast the Prince Regent in reality. So we'll see what he has in store. Again, the East India Company is wielding a lot of power. And number 6, we have ghosts in the show. I talked about those earlier. We have the ghost in the hold of the ship. We have another ghost that was in the books in the study. So we've got some things going on here. We'll find out if those are intentional or just little Easter eggs that the film crew snuck in there. So it just seems to me that where the show is going is James has this massive bomb he's setting up, and he's going for some major confrontation between the East India Company, probably for their obscure slave trade in Africa, the king and the government of Britain. I mean, if you think about it, you have a global superpower Britain, and you have the biggest global company with private armies and navies. That's the East India Company, and then you have the Americans. So he's kind of triangulating and setting them all up to fight each other to the death here. So he's lighting the fuse. Nootka Sound is probably the powder keg, and his stepmother, his new stepmother, showing up just might throw some water on that fuse and extinguish the flame. So we'll see what happens there. I think it'll be entertaining to see how it all blows up. And we have 6 more episodes to see what happens. So that's all I really have here for this episode. Kind of a recap there, introducing the new characters. Episode 3 is, it's almost 1 o'clock in the morning here, so it's going to be in a few hours. It'll be today, and hopefully this will give you a little bit of will trigger your memory here and what you saw last week as you watched episode 2. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to add them. I think I've turned that on now, so you're able to add some questions or comments to this show. And you can always leave them here on Small Scale Life, the blog. As far as, we do have other things going on here at Small Scale Life. I've got we're starting up the Healthy Lifestyle podcast again. So we've got another podcast talking about restarting with some fitness stuff and wellness stuff. So we'll talk about that. I've also got a great podcast coming up with a guy named Greg Burns from Nature's Image Farm in Ohio. So we talk a little bit about tribes, starting your small communities. We talk about homesteading. We talk about planning stuff, the old ways, and we talk about lumber squatches. Who are the lumber squatches and who is their leader? Who is Captain Lumber Squatch? So listen to that. That's coming out on Thursday this week. So make sure you listen to that. It's going to be a great episode. So thank you again for tuning into Small Scale Life. We do talk about other things besides taboo. So stick around. You might find something you like. And maybe something about the old ways of doing things. But thanks for tuning in. Remember to always learn, do, and grow. This is Tom from Small Scale Life and Talking Taboo, and we'll catch you next week. We'll do one of these a little earlier, so not at the 11th hour. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.